At the beginning of the film, we meet a woman named Maja sitting on a park bench, keeping an eye on her young son Patrick as he plays nearby. While Patrick is busy, Maja hears a man whistling and looks up to see him calling his dog. The sound of his whistle stirs something in her, an intense feeling, almost as if it's brought back a memory she can't quite place. She watches him closely, certain that she knows him, even though he appears to be a stranger. Unable to shake her suspicion, Maja tries to follow him, but before she can catch up, the man gets into his car and drives away. Over the next few days, Maja's curiosity grows into a quiet obsession. She follows the man around town, watching him from a distance as he goes about his daily life, completely unaware of her presence. Eventually, she learns where he lives and even watches him with his family, a wife and a young child. At one point, the family dog starts barking, sensing something unusual outside, which forces Maja to hide quickly to avoid being spotted. As her obsession with this man deepens, Maja begins to neglect her own life. She's so focused on watching him that she even forgets to pick up Patrick from school, which worries her husband, Louis. When he confronts her about her strange behavior, Maja brushes him off, keeping her thoughts to herself. Determined to find out if her suspicions are correct, Maja takes a job at the factory where the man works. Every day, she observes him up close, carefully noting his mannerisms, his voice, and his habits. She's desperate to confirm if he's really the man from her past, though she still can't fully remember his face. Her memories feel cloudy, haunted by brief flashes of trauma and pain. One evening, Maja decides to take action. She stages a breakdown with her car and calls out for help as the man leaves work.
My car broke down.
When he stops to assist her, Maja seizes the moment, hitting him with a hammer and knocking him unconscious. She stows him in her car's trunk and drives to a secluded spot in the forest where she has already dug a pit. The man regains consciousness as she pulls him from the trunk and points a gun at him, ready to confront him about his true identity. Terrified, he pleads for his life, insisting he doesn't understand why she's doing this. Unsure if he's telling the truth, Maja hesitates and decides to bring him back to her home, determined to confirm his identity. Back home, she finally confides in Louis, sharing a buried secret. She is a Holocaust survivor, haunted by memories of a Nazi concentration camp. She recalls witnessing unspeakable acts and her mother and sister being murdered by a Nazi officer. Though she never saw his face clearly, she remembers his voice and his whistle.
Why didn't you ever tell me this?
And she's convinced this man is that officer. Louis is skeptical, but worried, and checks on the man in their car, finding him terrified. Together, they bring him to the basement, tying him up to prevent escape. When asked his name, the man identifies himself as Thomas, claiming innocence and asserting that he is a Swiss citizen with no connection to Maja's past. He offers his ID, hoping to clear up the misunderstanding, but Maja refuses, convinced he's lying. That night, while Maja sleeps, Louis, feeling a pang of pity, sneaks into the basement to adjust the man's position. Thomas takes advantage, knocking Louis out and attempting to free himself. Walking to find Louis missing, Maja heads to the basement and intercepts Thomas just as he's nearly free. She blocks his path, but he overpowers her, escaping towards the front door to call for help. At that moment, Louis regains consciousness and tackles Thomas from behind, dislocating his shoulder in the struggle. They subdue him, but his shouts have drawn the attention of a neighbor who stops by to check on the commotion. Maja deflects suspicion calmly, promising to call the police if any more noises are heard. After returning Thomas to the basement, Louis reluctantly resets his shoulder, though he becomes increasingly uncomfortable with her actions. Doubts about Maja's story creep into his mind, leading him to investigate Thomas's background. His findings support Thomas's claims of Swiss nationality, further raising doubts. Meanwhile, Maja's frustration mounts as Thomas denies everything. She tries to force a confession by pouring alcohol down his throat, hoping to make him admit to the crime she remembers. Thomas, terrified, insists on his innocence, pleading that he has a family waiting for him and promising not to go to the police if they let him go.
Say it!
Maja remains unconvinced, demanding he admit what happened at the camp, as her memories haunt her, though they are fragmented. Concerned about Maja's deteriorating state, Lewis consults her therapist, who confirms her unresolved trauma could be affecting her perception. Maja grows desperate, certain that with enough pressure, Thomas will confess. Despite her relentless tactics, Thomas insists that he is not the man she thinks he is. Later, when Lewis returns home, he finds Thomas severely beaten. Angered by Maja's actions, he warns her that they'll eventually need to take Thomas to a hospital. Their argument escalates, and Lewis, grappling with the morality of their actions, leaves the basement. As he re-enters, he finds himself questioning Thomas again, who maintains his innocence. Just then, a police officer arrives, accompanied by Thomas's wife, Rachel, and a concerned neighbor. Thomas has been missing for days, and his distraught wife is desperately searching for him. The neighbor's report of strange noises led the police to investigate. Keeping her composure, Maja invites them in, explaining that the noise might have been a passerby. Just as the officers are about to leave, Maja spots a bloodstain on the wall. Thomas's blood. She discreetly covers it, hoping to hide any suspicion. Meanwhile, a struggle ensues in the basement between Lewis and Thomas, who are unaware the police are upstairs. After silencing Thomas, Lewis heads back up and unexpectedly encounters the officers. As a well-known doctor, Lewis isn't questioned extensively, though an officer notices a fresh cut on his head. Lewis falters in his response, but the officers ultimately overlook it and leave. Now knowing Thomas's wife, Maja decides to meet Rachel, hoping to glean more insight into Thomas. In her mind, she remains convinced that he's the Nazi officer responsible for atrocities during the war. From Rachel, Maja learns that Thomas has a daughter and a newborn son, sparking more curiosity. She questions Rachel, searching for any hint of a hidden past, but Rachel's answers only reinforce Thomas's claims, frustrating Maja further. With no concrete evidence, Maja clings to her belief that Thomas is the man who destroyed her family. She vividly recalls his mannerisms, his voice, and his whistle, which linger in her mind. In a painful conversation with Lewis, she recounts her experiences from World War II, including the scarcity of food and the hardships her family endured. She remembers the false sense of safety as the war neared its end, only for her family to be brutally attacked by German soldiers. Her sister, very young at the time, was among the victims. The weight of these memories fills Maja with a profound anger each time she looks at Thomas, convinced he is the face of her family's suffering. During her conversations with Rachel, Maja noticed something strange. Rachel wore a ring that looked very similar to one her sister used to wear. The ring had a Jewish symbol on it, catching Maja's attention. Maja began to question how a man like Thomas, who she believed was a former Nazi, could be married to a Jewish woman. This realization planted a small seed of doubt in her mind, making her wonder if she had mistaken Thomas for someone else. Yet, even with this doubt, Maja couldn't let go of her conviction that Thomas was the man from her past. Determined to get answers, Maja confronted Thomas again, demanding the truth. She spotted a ring on his hand that looked exactly like her sister's, which sparked suspicion that it might actually be her sister's ring. Overcome with rage, Maja cut off Thomas's finger to take the ring, ignoring his pain.
You crazy sadistic.
Later, when Lewis came in and saw Thomas's hand bleeding, he was horrified. Furious, he confronted Maja, asking why she would do something so cruel. Their argument became intense, and in a fit of anger, Lewis slapped Maja, then turned to tend Thomas's wounds. As Maja left the house, her mind was overwhelmed with doubt and guilt. She began to question if she had really captured the right man, or if her trauma had led her to make a terrible mistake. Yet deep down, she still believed that Thomas was indeed the man she remembered, and proving this was essential to her. At the same time, Lewis started doubting her sanity, suspecting that unresolved trauma might be causing her to act irrationally. Desperate to escape, Thomas begged Lewis to release him, promising not to report them to the police. He revealed that he was actually living in the US illegally. Although he was married to an American, he had previously been married in Switzerland, which made his immigration status complicated. Afraid of being deported, he swore he wouldn't tell anyone about what had happened if they had just let him go. This confession added to Lewis's doubts, but Maja remained unwavering, determined to try one more time to find evidence. Driven by her need for answers, Maja decided to meet with Rachel again, hoping for any clue about Thomas's past. Rachel mentioned that Thomas sometimes had terrible nightmares and sleepless nights, haunted by memories of the war. His nightmares were so severe that he would wake up in a panic. To Maja, This seemed like a sign of guilt. Although Rachel didn't know many details, she acknowledged that Thomas was deeply affected by these traumatic memories. This convinced Maja that he must have been involved in terrible acts during the war, and for her, it was the final proof she needed. That night, Maja confronted Thomas once more, this time holding a gun next to the hole she dug for him for burial. She demanded that he admit to being the man she remembered. When he denied it, Maja brought up his nightmares, asking why he would have such disturbing memories if he wasn't involved in the war. With no way out and realizing he couldn't escape, Thomas finally broke down. He confessed through tears that he had indeed been a Nazi officer named Thomas that admitted to horrific crimes, including the murder of Maja's family. He recalled leaving Maja for dead, assuming she hadn't survived the ordeal.
We shot everyone.
Hearing this confession, Maja's mind was flooded with painful memories, her hands shaking with anger and sadness. Louis, seeing Maja's suffering and the weight of Thomas's admission, took the gun from her and fired 4 shots into Thomas, killing him immediately. Shortly after that, they moved Thomas's body to the pit Maja had prepared in the forest and covered it with soil, hiding all traces of the crime. When they returned home, Maja and Louis cleaned the basement, erasing all evidence of Thomas's presence. They scrubbed the bloodstains and fixed anything that may have been broken, agreeing never to speak of what had happened again. It's clear that they carried the weight of their actions silently, knowing they could never undo what they'd done. In the final scene, we see Maja and Louis celebrating the 4th of July with their son, Patrick. Rachel's daughter is playing nearby, a sign of the complicated friendship Maja has still maintained with Rachel. Despite the horrors they had lived through and the secrets they now carried, Maja and Louis shared an unspoken bond over the past they had both buried, both in their memories and physically in the forest. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.